A reading from the Gospel of Luke. Meanwhile, when the crowd gathered by the thousands, so that they trampled on one another, Jesus began to speak first to his disciples. Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, that is, their hypocrisy. Nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you've whispered behind closed doors will be proclaimed from the housetops. I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that can do nothing more. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he has killed, has the authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten in God's sight. But even the hairs of your head are all counted. Do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. I'm not sure what's more intimidating in this passage from Luke, the first or the last, but I'll begin with the first, which is reminding me very much of a recent event at the cathedral where, going into an 11 o'clock Eucharist, we became aware after the fact that there was a hot mic, open mic downstairs in the clergy vesting room. And that always causes a panic, not only for the people who are upstairs and hearing mic'd voices coming from our sacristy, which is far, far away from where they are upstairs, and usually send somebody flying down and announcing, your mic is on. And we all kind of stop and rewind. What have we said? And not that we're saying horrible things in the sacristy, but there might be some slightly unfiltered thoughts going on down there. And I'm always reminded in that moment how good a principle it is simply to never say anything anywhere that I wouldn't be happy to have broadcast out into the church upstairs, and in this case, over the World Wide Web. So I'm sure that we've all had an occasion, if you have an email and you've sent an email and watched in despair as it goes away to an entire list, not the one person you meant to send it to. I think most of us have experienced a moment of panic when we imagine that something we've just said or written and meant for a particular audience was actually overheard by others. And when this happened most recently, actually at St. James just a couple weeks ago, we had a visiting preacher who noted, well, it's probably just best not to say anything you're not happy to have broadcast. And I think that's what Jesus is saying here. Don't get fooled by this sense we can have sometimes that we can be one way behind closed doors and another way out in public. It's really best not only for everybody in our lives, but it's best for us to say things in private and secret that we would only be happy to have broadcast as well. Surely there must be exceptions. There are moments of particular intimacy in our lives that are for particular people only, and there are moments of confession and places where we lay ourselves vulnerable in a way, whether it's to a spiritual director or to a therapist, or in the sacrament of confession between ourselves and a spiritual guide. But for the most part, we probably want to be living our lives as though we have a hot mic on at all times, so that we are not troubled by the thought that all that is said and in secret and behind closed doors will be one day made known. So that's one thing. And then that last little line, I find incredibly encouraging and also a little unnerving. Jesus says, aren't sparrows basically a dime a dozen? You get 5 for 2 pennies. But God knows each one of those sparrows. And beyond that, God knows every hair on your head. God can count the hairs on your head. And that is quite an image for you and me to take into the rest of this day. Not only is God hearing all that's going on in our lives and in our minds and behind the closed doors that we have, God knows our thoughts, God knows our heart, but also God sees us right down to that, the very physical minutia of our life, how many hairs are on our head. what does that mean if God knows me that well? What does that mean if God knows us so well, and yet sometimes we're not even aware of God in our daily life? That's an unbalanced perspective, but it is the perspective that Jesus tells us that God has. That whatever our attention span and whatever our authenticity of life, from behind closed doors to our public faces, that God is there for every moment of it, and God is there seeing us, knowing us, valuing us, and loving us, every single little part. And God is, I'm sure, rooting for us to have as much awareness of ourselves as God has of us, and to offer the places in our lives where we're in need of healing, where we are in need of refinement and growth. God, it's not that by ignoring those places in our own life, they don't exist, or by covering them up, God doesn't know about them. God is well aware of us in our particularity, in our details, in our day-to-day life. And God is always there with us, watching us, loving us, treasuring us, right down to the minutia of the hairs on our head. So I hope that you find that ultimately encouraging, as I do, slightly unnerving, but ultimately encouraging. And take that awareness with you into this day, and imagine how it might transform the way that you live the rest of the day that is before you. May God be with you in that awareness, and may God bless you and keep you this day and always. Amen.